My daughter had no idea I was a secret billionaire who'd bought her husband's company 6 months ago, the same husband who just handed her divorce papers while she lay writhing in agony on a hospital bed. But her husband didn't know I'd been watching him all these years. He was too cruel, and in 3 days I was going to take everything from him and bring my daughter the justice she deserved. Hello everyone, thank you for being here. Quick question, if someone you loved refused to listen to your warnings, would you step back or keep fighting? Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Note, this is a fictional story with meaningful themes. Let's see how this unfolds. The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. I hadn't slept well in years, 12 years to be exact, but that night I'd finally drifted off around midnight. The sound shattered the silence of my bedroom like glass breaking. My hand fumbled across the nightstand, knocking over a water glass before finding my phone. Mrs. Harrington. The voice on the other end was young, female, and breathless with urgency. This is she. My throat was dry. Nobody called at 2:47 a.m. with good news. This is Sharon Hughes, a nurse at Emory University Hospital. Your daughter, Emma Wells, was brought into our emergency room about 40 minutes ago. She's been in a serious car accident. The world tilted. Emma. I hadn't heard anyone speak her name aloud in so long that it felt like a word from a foreign language, one I'd once known fluently but had been forbidden to use. How bad? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Ma'am, she has 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a fractured pelvis. She's stable now, but where's her husband? The question came out sharper than I intended. Jordan Wells. Why isn't he there? There was a pause. A telling pause. We've been trying to reach him, ma'am. So far, no response. Of course. Of course, Jordan wasn't there. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was back in this very bedroom 12 years ago, standing in the doorway as Emma screamed at me from the hallway. She'd been 21, so young and so certain, her engagement ring catching the light as she stabbed her finger toward me. You don't get to control my life anymore. I don't need you. I don't need your opinions about Jordan. I don't need any of this. Her voice had been raw with fury and heartbreak. And then she'd turned her dark hair whipping behind her and walked out of my house, out of my life. I'd wanted to run after her, to grab her shoulders and shake her and tell her everything I knew about Jordan Wells, the man she was so determined to marry. But I'd stood there frozen, my mouth full of words I couldn't prove. Let her go, I'd told myself. Let her make her own mistakes. She'll come back when she realizes. But she never did. Ma'am, are you still there? The nurse's voice pulled me back to the present, to 2:47 a.m. and a daughter in a hospital bed. I'm here, I said, throwing back the covers and standing. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice didn't waver. I'm her mother. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Ma'am, visiting hours don't start until... I said I'll be there in 30 minutes. I was already moving toward my closet, phone pressed between my shoulder and ear. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly. Yes, ma'am. I'll let the staff know. I ended the call and stood in front of my walk-in closet, staring at rows of clothes I'd carefully selected over the years. Power suits for board meetings, elegant dresses for charity galas, casual wear that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything organized, everything in its place. Everything except my daughter. My hands were shaking. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a fractured pelvis, and Jordan, wherever he was, hadn't even bothered to show up. I pulled out a simple cashmere sweater and dark slacks, my mind already calculating drive time, hospital protocols, what I'd need to say to get past security at this hour. But underneath all that planning was one terrible, persistent question. After all these years, after everything that was said, would Emma even want me there? I pushed the thought away and reached for my car keys. It didn't matter. She was my daughter, and this time I wasn't going to let her face the storm alone. The highway stretched ahead of me, empty and dark. 28 minutes from my estate in Roswell to Emory University Hospital. I'd made this drive before, not to the hospital, but past Emma's house in Buckhead, more times than I cared to admit. My hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2 the way Charles had taught me. The way I'd taught Emma when she was 16 back when she still called me Mom. I'd hired Frank Donovan the week after Emma's wedding, not because I wanted to spy on my daughter, but because I needed to know she was safe, that my instincts about Jordan Wells had been wrong. They hadn't been. Frank's reports came monthly delivered to my office in unmarked envelopes. At first, they were benign subject promoted to marketing director. Subject appeared happy. Those early reports had been the hardest. Emma was happy. Without me. Then things changed. Subject appeared withdrawn at company party. Spouse left early alone. Then came the one that nearly broke me. Subject underwent emergency surgery at Northside Hospital. Hysterectomy. Spouse did not visit during 3-day recovery. Friend Rebecca Walsh stayed overnight. That was 2 years ago. I'd sat in my office, Frank's report trembling in my hands, and wept for the grandchildren I'd never meet, and the daughter I couldn't comfort. I wanted to call. God, how I wanted to call. But Emma had made it clear she didn't need me, so I stayed in the shadows and kept watching. 3 years ago, Frank's reports took a darker turn, spouse observed entering Saint. Regis Hotel with unidentified female. Physical contact suggests romantic involvement. Jordan was cheating on her. I could have sent Emma the reports, could have exposed Jordan myself. But she wouldn't have believed me. She'd stopped believing me over a decade ago when I'd tried to warn her about him. If I came forward now, she'd think I was trying to destroy her marriage. So I waited and watched and hoped Emma would see the truth on her own. The road blurred for a moment and I blinked hard. Not now. I couldn't fall apart now. Charles, I whispered to the empty car, if you were here, what would you tell me to do? My husband had been gone for 14 years since Emma was 19, a stroke, sudden and merciless. Emma and I had clung to each other in those first terrible months, until Jordan appeared. Charles would have known what to say to her, how to make her listen. But Charles wasn't here, and I'd failed our daughter all on my own. The GPS announced I was 5 minutes from the hospital. In the distance, I could see the building lit up against the night sky, a beacon for the broken and desperate. I wondered which category I fell into. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank, just heard about the accident. On my way. You need backup. I typed back. No. This is something I have to do alone. The hospital's emergency entrance came into view. I pulled into the parking garage, found a spot, and turned off the engine. For a long moment, I sat there in the silence, staring at the concrete wall. Through the windshield, I could see the hospital's sign blazing against the darkness, bright, clinical, unforgiving. Emergency, trauma, critical care. My daughter was somewhere in that building. And after all these years of watching from the shadows, I was finally going to see her again. But what if she doesn't want to see me? What if I've already lost her? What if I'm too late? The hospital corridor stretched ahead of me, sterile and cold under fluorescent lights. It was 3:45 a.m., and the only sounds were distant monitor beeps and my shoes squeaking against linoleum. I'd spent 30 minutes in the parking garage trying to find courage. Another 15 proving to the night receptionist that yes, I was Emma Wells' mother. That no, I hadn't been listed as her emergency contact. That hurt more than I'd expected. Now I stood outside, room 347, my hand frozen on the door handle. Through the small window I could see her, my daughter, surrounded by tubes and wires and machines that beeped in steady rhythms. She looked so small. Ma'am. A voice behind me. I turned to find the nurse who'd called me Sharon Hughes, her name tag read. Mid-40s with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. Are you family? My throat tightened. For over a decade, I hadn't been allowed to claim that word. I'm her mother, I managed to say. Sharon's expression softened. She's stable. The doctor will make rounds at 6, but right now she needs rest. The pain medication keeps her pretty drowsy. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Go ahead, Sharon said, gently opening the door. I think she could use her mom right now. Could she? I wanted to ask. Or will she send me away the moment she opens her eyes? But I stepped inside anyway. The room was darker than the hallway, illuminated only by monitor glow. An IV drip hung beside the bed. Bandages wrapped around her torso, those broken ribs. Her face was pale, bruised along one cheekbone, and her dark hair spread across the pillow like it used to when she was small. I moved closer each step, feeling like a mile. She looked older than 33, thinner. The Emma I remembered had been vibrant, laughing, full of life. This Emma looked worn down, like she'd been carrying weight too heavy for too long. "What did he do to you?" I reached the side of her bed and stood there unsure. We hadn't touched in over a decade, hadn't hugged, hadn't held hands, hadn't existed in the same room. Slowly, carefully, I reached out and took her hand. It was smaller than I remembered, bonier. Her fingers were cold and I could feel the ridge of her wedding ring, a simple band that probably cost a fraction of what Jordan spent on his suits. I wrapped both my hands around hers, trying to warm them. "I'm here, baby," I whispered. "I'm here." For a long moment, nothing. Just the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of oxygen. Then Emma's eyelids fluttered. My breath caught. Her eyes opened just barely, just enough to see me through a haze of medication and pain. Confusion, then recognition. "Mom." The word was barely a whisper, rough and uncertain, like she wasn't sure I was real. "Yes," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "It's me. I'm right here." Her lips moved like she wanted to say something else, but her eyes were already closing again, pulled back under by the medication. "I'm not going anywhere," I told her, even though she probably couldn't hear me. Not this time. I sank into the chair beside her bed, still holding her hand. The night stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, filled with questions I didn't have answers to. Where was Jordan? What would happen when Emma fully woke? Would she send me away? But for now, none of that mattered. I held my daughter's hand and refused to let go. Because I was terrified that if I did, if I loosened my grip for even a second, she would disappear from my life again. And I couldn't survive that twice. Morning came with harsh fluorescent lights. I dozed off around 5, my hand still wrapped around Emma's. A soft sound made me stir. Emma was awake, staring at me with surprise and confusion. "Hi," I said quietly, not letting go of her hand. She didn't pull away. That felt like a miracle. "You stayed," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. Of course I stayed. Before I could say more, the door swung open. Jordan Wells walked in. He looked exactly like I remembered from 13 years ago, receding hairline, hard eyes, expensive suit. Leather folder under one arm. He hadn't seen me yet. I'd moved behind the curtain partition instinct, telling me to observe first. "You're awake," he said to Emma, his tone flat. "Jordan," Emma's voice broke. "Where were you?" "The accident." "I was tied up with work." He set the leather folder on her blanket, right over her broken ribs. Emma winced. He didn't notice. "Oh, what is this?" Emma asked. "Divorce papers." He said it like he was ordering coffee. "I need you to sign them while you're still lucid." The blood drained from Emma's face. "Jordan, what are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago." He pulled out a pen. "I've already moved my things out. My lawyer will contact you, but I need your signature now. You're leaving me right now while I'm in the hospital." The timing isn't ideal, but he checked his watch. Once, twice. Like his wife's hospital bed was an inconvenience. I stepped out from behind the curtain. "Get out, right now!" Jordan's head snapped toward me. Recognition, then fear. "Genevieve." My name came out strangled. "What are you doing here?" "I'm her mother." I moved between him and Emma's bed. "And I'm telling you to leave. Now." "You have no right to." "I have every right." I stepped closer and he stepped back. "My daughter is lying here with 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a fractured pelvis. And you walk in with divorce papers like she's a business transaction. This is between me and my wife, your wife." I laughed, without humor. "You weren't here when the hospital called. You weren't here when she woke up terrified. You don't get to call her your wife." Jordan's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I held his gaze. 13 years ago, I'd caught him trying to scam my company with fake contracts and offshore accounts. I'd exposed him, blacklisted him. Then a year later, he'd shown up at my door as my daughter's boyfriend. I'd tried to warn Emma. She wouldn't listen. Now he was standing in front of me again. "Get out!" I said each word slowly, "or I call security." For a long moment, Jordan stood frozen. Color drained from his face. His hand trembled as he picked up the folder. He'd expected a defenseless woman in a hospital bed, someone he could manipulate one last time. Instead, he'd come face to face with me. After 13 years, he was standing in front of the one woman he'd never been able to control. The one woman who'd seen through every lie, every scheme. The woman he feared most. Without another word, Jordan turned and walked out. Fast. The door clicked shut. I watched through the window as he hurried down the corridor, and I could see it in every line of his body. The same fear I'd seen 13 years ago when I'd exposed him. He remembered, and he knew I wasn't done with him yet. The door clicked shut behind Jordan and silence filled the room. I stood there, hands clenched, trying to steady my breathing. "Mom?" Emma's voice came out small. "How did you know him?" I turned to face her. She looked so fragile against the white sheets, her face pale, except for the bruise on her cheekbone. But her eyes were sharp with questions I'd been dreading. I moved back to the chair and sat down slowly. 13 years ago. I began, "A man named Jay." Wells approached Legacy Investment Holdings with a business proposal. He wanted us to invest in what he called emerging offshore opportunities. Emma's brow furrowed. Jay Wells. Jordan Wells. He was using a shortened version of his name back then. I watched her face carefully. He was trying to scam us out of $500,000, fake contracts, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, forged bank statements. Emma's eyes widened. "That's not... Jordan wouldn't..." I exposed him in front of his investors. I had documentation, proof. When I told him I'd contacted the SEC, he disappeared. I paused, remembering that day the way Jordan's face had gone white, the same fear I'd seen this morning. "And then," Emma whispered, "a year later, you brought him home for dinner." My voice cracked. "You were so happy, so in love," and I looked across the table and saw him. "You never said anything." I tried. The words burst out. "Emma, I tried so hard to warn you. The fights we had, I told you something was wrong with him, but I didn't have proof anymore. He'd cleaned up his background. And you, I didn't believe you." Emma's voice was barely audible. "You told me I was trying to control your life, that I couldn't stand to see you happy. Each memory was a knife. You said you didn't need me anymore." Tears slipped down Emma's cheeks. "I was 21. I thought you just didn't like him." "I didn't like him because I knew what he was." I reached for her hand. "I knew he was a con artist, a liar, someone who took everything from people. But he seemed so normal, so kind." Emma's voice broke. "We built a life together. We had plans." She stopped her hand, moving to her abdomen. The hysterectomy. My heart broke again. "I know, sweetheart. Why didn't you show me the evidence back then?" I tried, but the evidence was from a different name, a different scheme. He was careful. By the time you brought him home, it would have looked like I was making up stories. Emma pulled her hand away, turning toward the window. "So you just watched for all these years. I hired someone to keep an eye on you, to make sure you were safe." I swallowed hard. "You were all I had left. I couldn't lose you completely." The silence stretched between us, heavy and painful. Finally, Emma spoke. "He said, before he left, he said you'd try to control me, that you'd manipulate me." My chest tightened. Even now, Jordan's poison was working. "And do you believe him?" I asked softly. Emma turned to look at me, and what I saw in her eyes shattered me. Doubt. After everything, after Jordan serving her divorce papers in a hospital bed, after years of unhappiness, there was still doubt. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Mom," she whispered. "Is any of this true? Or are you just trying to get me back?" The question hung in the air like broken glass. and I realized that 13 years of silence had done more damage than I'd ever imagined. The silence that filled the room was worse than any shouting match. At least when Emma had been angry all those years ago, I'd known she still felt something. This silence was empty, cold. "Why are you even here?" Emma asked, her voice flat. The question hit harder than I'd expected. "Because the hospital called me. I'm still listed as your emergency contact." "Why after all this time?" I never changed it. I met her eyes. "I never thought about removing your name, Emma, not once." Emma looked away. "You should have." "Maybe, but I couldn't." Another silence stretched between us. "If you knew about Jordan all along, why didn't you just tell me?" Emma asked quietly. "Why let me marry him?" The question pulled me back not just hours, but years. 12 years ago, my home office. Emma stood in the doorway, her engagement ring catching the light. 21 years old, so young, so certain. "We need to discuss Jordan," I said. "There's nothing to discuss. You don't like him, I get it, but I'm marrying him anyway." "Emma, I already know who he is." "What does that even mean? I can't give you all the details, but I'm asking you to trust me. Jordan isn't who he says he is. That's just you trying to control my life." Her voice rose. "From what?" "From being happy." "He doesn't love you, Emma. He's using you." The words landed like bullets. "You don't know him," Emma said, shaking. "You don't know anything about us. Jordan loves me. He wants to build a life with me. And you can't stand it because you can't control it." "I wish I was wrong, Emma." My voice cracked. "I truly do. I wish I could be at your wedding and believe every word, but I can't." "Then don't come." Emma's eyes were bright with tears. "Don't come to my wedding. Don't call me. Don't try to see me. I don't need a mother who can't be happy for me. Emma, please, get out of my life." She said each word deliberately. "I mean it. Get out." And then she was gone. The memory faded. I stood in a different hospital room looking at a different Emma, older, worn down, but just as determined to push me away. "I couldn't tell you the specifics," I said quietly. "Jordan had been careful to separate his identities. By the time you brought him home, there was no paper trail. If I'd accused him without proof, I would have looked like a controlling mother making up stories." "So you said nothing?" "I said everything I could without evidence. And you left." I pulled a business card from my purse, "David Sullivan, attorney at law." I set it on the table beside her bed. "But I never stopped trying to protect you." Emma stared at the card but didn't touch it. "When you're ready to hear the whole truth, when you're ready to see the evidence I've been gathering, call him. David Sullivan is my attorney. He has everything." I moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll be waiting, sweetheart, however long it takes." I walked out before she could see me cry. I sat in the hospital corridor for 3 hours. The chair was hard plastic, designed to discourage lingering, but I wasn't leaving. I'd told Emma I'd be waiting. Around noon, I heard quick footsteps. A woman rushed down the hallway, early 30s, dark curly hair in a messy bun, eyes red and worried. Rebecca Walsh, Emma's best friend. I recognized her from Frank's reports. She slowed when she saw me. "Mrs. Harrington." "Genevieve." She glanced at Emma's door. "I heard about the accident. Is she stable?" 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, fractured pelvis. "And Jordan?" The way she said his name, bitter, told me everything. "He brought divorce papers this morning." Becca's eyes went wide. "He wanted her to sign them while she was still lucid." "That son of a..." She caught herself. "You threw him out, didn't you?" "Yes." Something shifted in her expression. Relief. "Good." She moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Does she know about the affair?" My heart stuttered. "You know, for 6 months. I tried to tell her, but she wouldn't believe me." Becca's voice cracked. "She thought I was jealous." "I've been trying to tell her for years," I said quietly. Our eyes met. 2 women who'd watched Emma suffer, powerless to stop it. "She'll believe it now." Becca said, pulling out her phone. I have proof, photos, messages, everything. She knocked gently and went inside. I stayed in my chair, hands clenched. For 10 minutes, silence. Then I heard a sound that broke my heart all over again. Emma was crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that echoed through the door. The kind of crying that comes from a soul holding everything in for too long. I wanted to run in, wanted to hold her, but I forced myself to stay still. This was Becca's moment. 30 minutes passed. The crying continued, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but never stopping. Finally, the door opened. Becca stepped out, her own eyes red and swollen. She looked at me and nodded once. She needs you. I stood so fast the chair scraped. My legs felt unsteady as I moved to the door. Emma sat up in bed, tissues scattered around her face, blotchy and swollen. Her phone lay face up on the blanket, a photo of Jordan with his arm around a young blonde woman. Intimate, undeniable. Mom. Emma's voice was hoarse. 3 years. He's been with someone else for 3 years. I moved to her bedside and did what I'd been aching to do for over a decade. I wrapped my arms around my daughter and held her while she cried. She buried her face in my shoulder, her whole body shaking, and I felt her grip tighten like she was afraid I might disappear. I'm here, I whispered into her hair. I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere. We stayed like that for a long time, Emma crying me, holding her, both of us trying to bridge 12 years of silence with a single embrace. Finally, Emma pulled back. Her eyes were swollen, nose red, but there was something different now. Clarity. She reached for the business card on the bedside table, David Sullivan's card, and held it between trembling fingers. I need to know everything, Mom, she said quietly. All of it, no matter how bad it is. I took her hand and squeezed gently. Okay, everything. I called David Sullivan the moment Emma said she was ready. Bring everything, I told him. All the files, she needs to see it. He arrived at 6 that evening carrying a leather briefcase. Emma was sitting up in bed, her face still swollen from crying, but her eyes were clear now, determined. Ms. Wells, David said, extending his hand. I'm David Sullivan. I've been your mother's attorney for 8 years. Emma glanced at me. 8 years. Since shortly after you got married, I confirmed quietly. David pulled a chair beside the bed and opened his briefcase. He didn't ease into it. Your husband has been operating a Ponzi scheme through Summit Investment Partners for 5 years. Total fraud, $47 million. 230 investors. The color drained from Emma's face. That's not possible. Summit is legitimate. Summit is a shell. David corrected gently. The investments don't exist. He's been using new investor money to pay fake returns to old ones. He laid out documents on the bed, bank statements, investor contracts, forged returns. But that's not the worst part. David's voice softened. 3 years ago, Jordan began opening offshore accounts in your name. We've identified 15 so far. Your signature is on every account. What? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. I never signed anything. He forged your signature. But legally you're listed as co-owner, which means when the FBI closes in, you'll be charged alongside him. Emma's breath came in short gasps. I could go to prison. 20 to 30 years, David said honestly, unless we can prove you had no knowledge. I didn't, I swear. I know. I reached for her hand and held tight. You're not going to prison, Emma, not if I can help it. Emma looked at me with terrified eyes. How? David cleared his throat. 6 months ago, your mother acquired Summit Investment Partners through a shell corporation. Jordan doesn't know she's the owner, which means we've had access to internal records for half a year. Emma's gaze snapped to me. You bought his company. I bought it to protect you, I said simply. I knew something was wrong. When I found out what he'd done with your name, I bought the company so I could document everything, so I could prove you weren't involved. Emma stared at me and I watched the pieces click into place. The years of distance, the warnings she'd ignored, the mother she'd pushed away. All of it had been leading here. You knew, Emma whispered. You knew he would do this to me. I knew he was capable of it, I said quietly. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks again, but these were different. Not heartbreak, but understanding, regret. "I'm sorry, Mom," she choked out. "I'm so sorry. You tried to warn me. You tried to protect me. And I told you to get out of my life." "Shh." I moved onto the edge of the bed and pulled her into my arms. "It's okay. You're okay now." Emma clung to me, and this time when she cried, it wasn't just grief. It was release. For the first time in 12 years, my daughter let me hold her, not because she was broken, but because she chose to. "I've got you," I whispered into her hair. "I've always had you." Morning came softly with gentle light filtering through the hospital blinds. I'd spent the night in the chair beside Emma's bed again, but this time she'd asked me to stay. When I stirred awake around 7, Emma was already watching me. "Mom," her voice was quiet, tentative. "Will you sit with me just for a little while?" "Of course, sweetheart." I moved from the chair to the edge of her bed, taking her hand in mine. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the hospital, waking up footsteps in the hallway medication carts, rattling the soft beep of monitors. "I should have listened to you," Emma said finally. 12 years ago. I should have believed you about Jordan." I squeezed her hand gently. "You were 21. You were in love. You wanted to believe in the person you'd chosen. But you were right. About everything. Being right doesn't make me feel any better." I brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I would have given anything to be wrong, Emma. I wanted nothing more than for Jordan to prove me wrong, to make you happy, to be the man you believed he was." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you ever give up on me after everything I said to you, after I told you to get out of my life?" "Because you're my daughter." The answer was simple, fundamental. I could never give up on you. Even when you didn't want me, I was still your mother. That doesn't just stop. "But 12 years, Emma's voice broke. "How did you survive it? Not seeing me, not talking to me?" I took a deep breath, considering how much to tell her. "Do you remember Frank Donovan? The investigator David mentioned?" Emma nodded. "I hired him a week after your wedding. Not to spy on you, or maybe it was spying, I don't know anymore, but I needed to know you were safe, that you were okay." "What did he tell you?" "Everything." I smiled sadly. "Monthly reports. Where you worked, how you were doing. When you got promoted to marketing director, I was so proud. When you and Becca became friends, I was relieved you had someone. You knew about Becca." "I knew about everything, Emma, the good days and the bad ones. When you stopped smiling as much, when you started working later hours, when you—" I paused, my throat tightening. "When you had your surgery 2 years ago." Emma's hand flew to her abdomen. "You knew about that." "Frank's report said Jordan didn't visit you in the hospital, that Rebecca stayed with you instead." Tears slipped down my cheeks. I wanted to be there so badly. I wanted to hold your hand and tell you it would be okay. But I knew you wouldn't want to see me. "Oh, Mom," Emma was crying now too. "I'm so sorry for all of it, for pushing you away, for not listening, for believing Jordan over you." "You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do." Emma gripped my hand tighter. "You spent 12 years watching over me from the shadows. You bought Jordan's company to protect me. You documented everything to keep me out of prison. And I—" Her voice broke completely. "I threw you out of my life. And now you're letting me back in," I said softly. "That's all that matters." Emma wiped at her tears with her free hand. "What happens now with Jordan? With the FBI? With everything?" I straightened slightly, feeling something shift in the air between us. This wasn't just a mother comforting her daughter anymore. This was 2 women preparing to fight. "Now we take him down," I said quietly. "Together. David has everything we need, the forged signatures, the Ponzi records, the offshore accounts. The FBI has been building their case for months. We just need to make sure you're protected when they move. And you'll be with me through all of it. Every step." I squeezed her hand and she squeezed back, not with fear or uncertainty, but with determination. For the first time in 12 years, we weren't just mother and daughter. We were allies. I've been preparing for this moment for 6 months, I told Emma that afternoon. David had returned to the hospital with his laptop and a stack of additional files. Emma was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had since the accident. The pain medication had been reduced, and her mind was sharp. 6 months, Emma repeated. 6 months. I opened David's laptop and turned it toward her. Let me show you. On the screen was a timeline, a detailed map of every move I'd made since acquiring Summit Investment Partners. Last October, I began. Frank's reports showed Jordan's behavior was escalating. The affair had been going on for 2 years by then. But more importantly, he'd started moving money in ways that didn't make sense. I clicked to the next slide. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, shell corporations. Frank brought his findings to me and I hired forensic accountants. It took them 3 weeks to uncover the Ponzi scheme. Emma stared at the screen, her face pale. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to confirm what I'd suspected for years, that Jordan was exactly who I'd always known him to be. I clicked again. Once we had proof, I had a choice. I could expose him immediately and hope you'd believe me, or I could position myself to protect you when everything collapsed. So you bought his company, Emma said quietly. Through Legacy Holdings, yes. Jordan applied for acquisition funding 6 months ago. He was desperate. The Ponzi was collapsing faster than he could sustain it. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. I smiled without humor. He still doesn't know I'm the owner. David leaned forward. Which means we've had access to Summit's internal records for 6 months. Every transaction, every forged document, every lie Jordan told his investors. Frank continued tracking Jordan, I added. The affair with Brittany Cole, the embezzlement of $5 million from company accounts, the fake client portfolios, all of it documented. But you didn't tell me, Emma said, and there was no accusation in her voice, just understanding. You wouldn't have believed me 6 months ago, sweetheart. You had to see it yourself. Emma nodded slowly. So what happens now? Now, David said we coordinate with the FBI. Special Agent Martinez has been building his case for 8 months. He's just been waiting for the right moment to move. And we have witnesses, I added. Philip Warren Summit's CFO came to me 3 months ago. He discovered the Ponzi independently and was terrified Jordan would implicate him. He's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Philip knew. Emma looked shocked. He figured it out eventually. Unlike Jordan, Philip actually does his job. I clicked to another slide. And then there's Brittany. Emma's expression hardened at the name. Brittany Cole thought she was Jordan's girlfriend, I said carefully. She didn't know he was married until recently, when she found out she was receptive to helping us. She has text messages, photos, proof of Jordan moving assets into accounts under her name, assets he planned to steal once the divorce went through. Emma's hands clenched in her lap. He was going to frame her too. Jordan frames everyone eventually, David said. It's what he does. I closed the laptop and looked at my daughter. In 3 days, there's a scheduled board meeting at Summit. Jordan thinks he's going to present quarterly earnings. He thinks everything is under control. But it's not, Emma whispered. It's not. I took her hand. In 3 days, Jordan Wells walks into that boardroom thinking he owns the company, and we're going to take everything from him. Emma stared at me, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw something in her eyes I thought I'd lost forever. Respect. Admiration. Trust. You've been planning this for 6 months, she said softly. All of this. For me. For you. I confirmed. Always for you. The next morning, I drove across Atlanta to meet my son-in-law's mistress. Octane Coffee sat in a quiet corner of Virginia Highland, the kind of place where people could talk without being overheard. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back away from the windows. Brittany Cole walked in at exactly 9 o'clock. She was younger than I'd expected, 27 according to Frank's reports, but she looked even younger. Blonde hair pulled into a ponytail, minimal makeup, dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. She spotted me immediately and hesitated in the doorway. I raised a hand slightly, and after a moment, she walked over. "Ms. Cole," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please sit down." She sat, but her posture was rigid defensive. "Mrs. Harrington." "Genevieve, please." "Okay." She didn't reach for the coffee I'd ordered for her. "Why did you want to meet?" "Because I think we can help each other." Brittany's laugh was bitter. "Help each other? Your daughter's husband has been sleeping with me for 3 years. I'm not sure what kind of help you're looking for." "The kind that puts Jordan Wells in prison," I said calmly. That got her attention. She leaned back slightly, studying me. "You're serious?" "Completely." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then quietly, "I didn't know he was married at first. I believe you." "Do you?" Her voice cracked. "Because when I found out 6 months ago, I felt like the stupidest person alive. 3 years. 3 years of him telling me he loved me, that we were building a future together. And the whole time, he was lying. I finished. To you, to my daughter, to everyone." Brittany nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "When I confronted him, he said Emma was leaving him, that the marriage was over anyway, that it didn't matter. And then he started using me." She took a shaky breath. "He opened accounts in my name, said it was for our future. But I started noticing things, money moving in and out, amounts that didn't make sense. When I asked about it, he got angry, told me to stay out of his business." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but the implication was clear." Brittany finally reached for the coffee, wrapping her hands around the cup like she needed the warmth. "I work at Summit. I'm a junior analyst. He reminded me of that. How easily he could make my career disappear." "So you started collecting evidence," I said. Her eyes snapped to mine. "How did you?" "Because that's what I would have done." I leaned forward. "And because my attorney told me you'd been cooperative when he reached out." Brittany pulled a small hard drive from her purse and set it on the table between us. 6 months of text messages, emails, photos, bank statements from the accounts he opened in my name. Everything. I looked at the drive but didn't pick it up yet. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I'm tired of being used." Her voice was steady, now angry. "Because he made me complicit in whatever he's doing. Because when this all comes crashing down, I don't want to be the one who goes down with him." "You won't," I said. "I promise you that." "How can you promise that?" "Because I've been preparing for this for 6 months. I own Summit Investment Partners. The FBI is ready to move. We have witnesses. And now," I reached across and took the hard drive. "Now, we have your testimony and evidence." Brittany stared at me. "You own Summit." "Through a shell company?" "Yes. Jordan has no idea." For the first time since she'd walked in, Brittany smiled. It was small, tentative, but real. "He's going to lose everything, isn't he? Everything I confirmed." "Good." She stood up and I stood with her. "I'm sorry about your daughter, about all of this." "Thank you," I said quietly. "And I'm sorry for what my son-in-law put you through." We stood there for a moment, 2 women who'd been hurt by the same man, now united in bringing him down. I left Octane Coffee with more than just evidence. I left with an unexpected, powerful ally. 10 days after the accident, Emma was discharged from the hospital. She came home to my estate in Roswell, to the guest room that had waited 12 years for her return. 2 days later, she told me she wanted to see Jordan one last time. "Alone," she said firmly. "I need to do this alone, Mom." Every instinct screamed at me to say no, but Emma was 33 years old and this was her fight too, so I waited. I sat in the living room watching the clock, my hands clenched. She came home just after 9 that evening. I met her at the door. She looked tired but steady, her face calm. "Come sit with me," I said. Emma sat beside me, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Then she smiled, small, satisfied. He still thinks he's in control, she said quietly, even now. Tell me what happened. We met at Chop's Lobster Bar, his choice. Emma's voice was steady. He was already there when I arrived. He ordered wine without asking what I wanted. Expensive, like he was celebrating. What did he say? He talked about the divorce, how he'd been generous with the settlement, how I'd get the house and a reasonable amount. Emma shook her head. He had this speech about how we'd grown apart, like I was supposed to be grateful, and you let him talk for 20 minutes. Emma's smile grew. I let him order dinner, pour wine, lay out his entire plan for leaving me with just enough while he disappeared with everything else. And then I told him I knew about Brittany. I watched my daughter's face. No pain, just cold satisfaction. He tried to deny it, said I was paranoid. So I showed him the photos, all of them, 3 years worth. How did he react? He got angry, said it didn't matter, that the affair didn't change the divorce. Emma paused. So then I told him about the $47 million. My breath caught. You told him. I told him I knew about the Ponzi scheme, the 230 investors, the offshore accounts in my name. Emma's voice was calm. I watched the color drain from his face. What did he say? He said I was bluffing, that I didn't have proof. Emma turned to look at me. That's when I mentioned your name. You told him I was involved. I told him you owned Summit, that you'd owned it for 6 months, that you'd been documenting everything. Emma's eyes were bright. Mom, you should have seen his face. He went white. His hands started shaking. He knows he's trapped, I said quietly. He knows. Emma nodded. He tried to bluster about lawyers, but I could see it in his eyes. He remembers what you did to him 13 years ago, and he knows you're about to do it again. We sat in silence, letting it sink in. 3 more days, I said. The board meeting is in 3 days. Emma reached for my hand and squeezed. 3 days until his world ends. Are you ready for that? Mom, Emma said, her voice steel. I've been ready since he walked into my hospital room with those divorce papers. That evening, I officially brought my daughter home, not to a guest room, not to temporary shelter, but home to the estate where she'd grown up, where she'd learned to ride bikes in the driveway and play piano in the music room, where her father had taught her chess and I'd taught her to be strong. We walked through the front door together, and I watched Emma's eyes sweep across the familiar space, the marble entryway, the grand staircase. The living room where Emma stopped her gaze fixed on the Persian rug near the fireplace. That's where Dad, she whispered. Yes. I took her hand. That's where he collapsed, 14 years ago. Emma hadn't been there when it happened. She'd been at college 2 hours away. By the time she'd made it home, Charles was already gone. I never got to say goodbye to him, Emma said quietly. I know, sweetheart. I squeezed her hand. But he knew you loved him. He always knew. We stood there for a moment longer, then I gently guided her toward the stairs. Come on, there's something I want to show you. Emma's old bedroom was on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left. I'd walked past it countless times over the years, sometimes pausing at the threshold but never going inside. Now I opened the door and stepped back. Emma moved past me slowly, her breath catching as she looked around. Everything was exactly as she'd left it 12 years ago. The pale blue walls she'd chosen when she was 16, the bookshelf filled with college textbooks and childhood favorites. The photos on her desk, her and Charles at her high school graduation, her and Becca at some long-ago party, her and me at her 21st birthday dinner, just weeks before everything fell apart. You kept it, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. You kept everything. I couldn't change it. My voice was thick. I kept hoping one day you'd come back. Emma moved to her desk, running her fingers over the old surface. That's when she saw it, a wooden box sitting in the center, tied with a simple ribbon. What is this? Open it. Emma untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside were 12 envelopes, each one addressed in my handwriting, Emma on your 22nd birthday. Emma on your 23rd birthday. And so on all the way to Emma on your 33rd birthday. Letters, I said softly. One for every birthday you were gone. I wrote them even though I couldn't send them. Even though I didn't know if you'd ever read them. Emma pulled out the first envelope with shaking hands. I'll give you some privacy, I said, backing toward the door. Mom, read them, sweetheart. I'll be right downstairs if you need me. I closed the door gently and stood in the hallway listening to the soft sound of paper rustling. Then after a few minutes, I heard Emma start to cry. Not the broken sobs from the hospital. These were different, deeper, rawer, the sound of someone finally letting go of years of buried pain. I slid down to sit on the floor outside her door, my back against the wall, and waited. 20 minutes passed, maybe 30. I lost track of time. Then the door opened. Emma stood there clutching the letters to her chest, her face blotchy and swollen. She looked at me sitting on the floor and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You wrote me every year, she choked out. Even when I wouldn't talk to you, even when Her voice broke. You never stopped loving me. I couldn't, I said, simply standing up. You're my daughter. Emma closed the distance between us and threw her arms around me, holding on like she was afraid I might disappear. I'm home, Mom, she whispered into my shoulder. I'm finally home. I held her tight, this daughter I'd never stopped fighting for, and felt 12 years of grief and longing finally begin to heal. Yes, you are, I whispered back. You're home. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep in her childhood bed, surrounded by those 12 letters, I stood in her doorway watching her breathe. Tomorrow we would face Jordan together. Tomorrow we would take back everything he'd stolen. But tonight my daughter was home, and that was all that mattered. If you've made it this far, please comment below with your prediction. What do you think will happen when Jordan walks into that boardroom? Will he fight back or surrender? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Quick reminder, this story includes fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. If this isn't for you, feel free to pause here. I walked into Summit Investment Partners' boardroom at 9:55 a.m. with the bearing of someone who owned the place. Because I did. The room was exactly as I'd imagined, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Atlanta, a long mahogany table, and at the head of that table, a leather chair that had never been occupied by anyone but Jordan Wells, until today. I moved to that chair and sat down, setting my briefcase on the table with a deliberate click. Around the table, board members were already seated. Peter Harmon gave me a subtle nod. Helen Rodriguez offered a small smile. They'd been briefed 3 days ago about who actually owned Summit. The clock ticked toward 10. At 9:58, David Sullivan entered and took the seat to my right. At 9:59, Philip Warren slipped in quietly and sat near the far end, his face pale but determined. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened. Jordan Wells walked in. He wore an expensive suit, hair perfectly styled, smile, confident. The smile of a man who thought he controlled everything in this room. That smile died the moment he saw me. His steps faltered. His briefcase nearly slipped from his hand. I watched the color drain from his face as his eyes locked on mine, sitting in his chair at the head of his table. What? He stopped, cleared his throat. What the hell is she doing here? He was looking at Peter Harmon, but Peter didn't answer. None of the board members did. Jordan's gaze snapped to David Sullivan. Sullivan, what is this? David stood slowly. Mr. Wells, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Genevieve Harrington, who represents the majority shareholder of Summit Investment Partners. Majority shareholder. Jordan's voice rose. What are you talking about? I own this company. You founded it, I said, my voice cutting through his panic like ice. You ran it, but you haven't owned it for 6 months. Jordan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. Legacy Investment Holdings. I continued calmly. Perhaps you remember them. They made you a generous offer last October when you were desperate for capital. You signed the acquisition papers yourself. I pulled a document from my briefcase and slid it across the table. Jordan's signature was there at the bottom, next to the corporate seal of a shell company he'd never bothered to research. Legacy Investment Holdings is my company, Jordan, which means Summit is my company, which means you work for me. The silence was absolute. Jordan's hands were shaking. I could see him trying to put the pieces together. You. His voice was barely a whisper. You've been... For 6 months. 6 months, I confirmed. 6 months of access to every file, every transaction, every lie you've told. 6 months of documentation. Jordan's legs seemed to give out, and he grabbed the back of the nearest chair. That's when the door opened again. Emma walked in. She wore a navy suit, hair pulled back spine straight. She moved to stand beside my chair, her hand resting lightly on the back of it. Jordan looked between us. His wife, his mother-in-law, the 2 women he'd manipulated for years now standing together at the head of the boardroom. "Hello, Jordan," Emma said, her voice steady. "Surprised to see me?" I watched Jordan's face as the full reality finally sank in. He'd been played. For 6 months, he'd thought he was in control, thought he was the master manipulator, thought he'd gotten away with everything. And the whole time, I'd been 3 steps ahead. I met his eyes across the table and smiled. "Shall we begin?" It took 15 minutes to destroy what Jordan had built on lies over 5 years. David stood and connected his laptop to the boardroom screen. Let's begin with the facts. The first slide appeared Summit Investment Partners, financial overview. I watched Jordan's face as David clicked through the evidence. Pale, then ashen, then gray. For the past 5 years, David said, Mr. Wells has been operating a Ponzi scheme through Summit Investment Partners. Total fraud, $47 million. 233 investors. The screen showed names, retirees, teachers, nurses, people who'd trusted Jordan with their life savings. Last March, David continued, one of those investors, George Miller, age 67, took his own life after losing $850,000. I heard someone inhale sharply. Helen Rodriguez covered her mouth. Jordan sat frozen knuckles white, gripping the table. Mr. Wells also opened 15 offshore accounts using forged signatures from his wife, Emma Wells, making her legally liable. David clicked to bank statements. He planned to flee the country with these assets, leaving Ms. Wells to face prosecution. Emma's hand found mine under the table. I squeezed gently. Additionally, David said, Mr. Wells embezzled $5 million from Summit's operating accounts and laundered money through accounts opened in Brittany Cole's name. The screen filled with transaction records, forged signatures, offshore account numbers. Finally, I'd like to invite CFO Philip Warren to speak. Philip stood slowly. He looked years older, but his voice was steady. 3 months ago, I discovered discrepancies in our financial reports. When I investigated, I found the Ponzi scheme. He looked at Jordan. I brought my concerns to Mr. Wells. He threatened to frame me, so I went to Mrs. Harrington instead. Philip sat down. I gave him a small nod. Peter Harmon cleared his throat. I move that Jordan Wells be immediately terminated from all positions at Summit Investment Partners and that all authority be revoked. Second, Helen Rodriguez said, all in favor. Every hand went up, except Jordan's. Motion passes unanimously, Peter said. Mr. Wells, you are terminated. Before security could move, the boardroom door opened. 3 people in dark suits walked in. Special Agent Martinez, FBI, the lead man said, showing his badge. Jordan Wells, you're under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Jordan finally moved. He stood, legs shaking. You can't. This is a mistake. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Martinez said as his colleague moved behind Jordan with handcuffs. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The click of the handcuffs was the only sound in the room. Jordan's eyes found mine as they led him toward the door. Hatred, disbelief, defeat. You planned all of this, he said, his voice hollow. Every single piece. I stood, keeping Emma's hand in mine. I was just protecting my daughter, I said quietly. That's what mothers do. Agent Martinez led Jordan out. The door closed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Emma turned to me, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "It's over." "Yes," I said, pulling her into my arms. "It's over." And as I held my daughter in that boardroom surrounded by the wreckage of Jordan's empire, I didn't feel triumph or victory. I felt peace. If you're still here after witnessing Jordan's arrest, I'd love to hear from you. Comment and share how that felt. Did justice satisfy you? Do you think Emma and her mother can truly heal now? Your perspective matters deeply to me. Before we continue, some elements are dramatized for impact. The message remains meaningful, though details are fictional. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom, my hand wrapped tightly around Emma's. The room was packed. Victims filled every seat, some I recognized from the investor list, others I'd never seen, all waiting for this moment. Jordan sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive suits and confidence long gone. He looked smaller, diminished. "The court will now hear victim impact statements," the judge said. One by one they stood. A retired teacher who'd lost her pension, a nurse who'd invested her daughter's college fund, a young couple who'd saved for their first house. Each story was a knife. Then Linda Miller stood. She was in her late 60s, gray hair pulled back, wearing a black dress that looked like she'd worn it to her husband's funeral. "My husband George," she began, voice trembling, "worked 43 years as an accountant. He was careful with money. He researched everything." She looked at Jordan. "He trusted you. You showed him documents. You looked him in the eye and lied." I felt Emma tense beside me. "George invested everything we had, $850,000, our entire retirement. When he found out it was gone, that it had never existed, he couldn't live with it, with the shame." Her voice broke. "My husband took his own life because of what you did." She wiped her eyes. "Every single day you spend in prison, I hope you think about him, about all of us." Linda sat down. Jordan's shoulders sagged. After the last victim spoke, the judge removed his glasses. "Mr. Wells, you have been found guilty of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. You destroyed lives, families, and futures. You showed no remorse until you were caught." The judge paused. "I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. You will also pay restitution of $47 million. Emma's hand squeezed mine so hard it hurt. 15 years. I watched reality settle over Jordan. 15 years gone. He'd be in his 50s when he got out with a felony record and no career. Everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen, meaningless now. As the bailiff moved to escort him out, Jordan turned and looked at Emma one last time. I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Regret. Not for what he'd done to his victims, not for the lives he'd destroyed, but regret that he'd lost, that he'd been caught, that Emma had slipped away. Too little, too late. Emma and I stood and walked out together, her hand still in mine. Outside on the courthouse steps, Linda Miller was waiting. When she saw us, she rushed over and threw her arms around me. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for giving us justice, for making him pay. George can finally rest now." I held her, this stranger who'd lost everything because of the man my daughter had married. "I'm so sorry for your loss," I whispered. "You stopped him," Linda said, pulling back. "That's what matters." After Linda left, Emma and I stood on the courthouse steps watching people stream past. "What do we do now, Mom?" Emma asked quietly. I looked at my daughter, stronger now, healing but still scarred. "Now," I said, squeezing her hand, "we heal." 1 year later, I stood on my porch watching Emma kneel in the rose garden, her hands deep in the soil. Spring had come to Georgia with its usual gentle insistence, warm air, green grass, flowers pushing up through the earth like promises. Emma had bought a small cottage 3 miles from my estate, close enough that we saw each other every day, far enough that she had her own space to heal. She didn't need much. The settlement from the divorce had been modest. Jordan had nothing left to give, But between what little remained and the job offer from one of Summit's competitors, Emma was rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, on her own terms. I watched her now tending the roses Charles had planted 15 years ago. She'd taken over their care without me asking, spending hours pruning and mulching and talking to them like they could hear her. Maybe they could. Charles always said plants grew better when you love them. "Coffee's ready," I called out. Emma looked up, dirt smudged across her cheek, and smiled. The kind of smile I hadn't seen in over a decade, open, genuine, reaching her eyes. She pulled off her gardening gloves and joined me on the porch, taking the mug I offered. We sat in the rocking chairs Charles had built, watching the morning light filter through the oak trees. "I was thinking about Dad this morning," Emma said quietly. "How he used to make us pancakes on Sundays. Remember, he'd always burn the first one and give it to himself. He said it was tradition," I said, smiling at the memory. "The chef eats the mistakes. I wish I could tell him I'm sorry for pushing both of you away. He knows, sweetheart, and he's proud of you. I know he is." We sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee, listening to birds sing in the garden. "Mom," Emma said finally, her voice soft, "I wasted 12 years of my life. 12 years I could have spent with you, with people who actually loved me." I set down my mug and reached for her hand. "No," I said firmly. "You didn't waste them. You learned from them. You learned what real love looks like and what manipulation looks like. You learned your own strength. You learned that coming home isn't weakness, it's courage." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But I hurt you. I said terrible things. I told you to get out of my life." "And I never left," I said simply. "That's what mothers do, Emma. We wait, we watch. We love our children even when they don't love us back. Because we know deep down, we always know that one day they'll come home." Emma set down her coffee and moved to kneel beside my chair, taking both my hands in hers. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "I should have said that 12 years ago. I should have said it every day. I always knew," I said, cupping her face in my hands. "Even when you couldn't say it, even when you thought you didn't, a mother always knows." Emma leaned her head against my knee, and I stroked her hair the way I used to when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. "We're going to be okay," Emma said. "Aren't we?" "We already are," I told her. Later, as Emma went back to her roses, I watched her laugh at something, maybe a butterfly, maybe just the joy of a perfect spring morning. The sunlight caught in her hair, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had at 21 before Jordan, before the pain, before 12 years of silence. But this Emma was better, stronger, wiser. This Emma had come home. I looked up at the sky, at the clouds drifting past, and I felt it a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. Charles was here somehow, watching with me, smiling at the daughter we'd raised together, the daughter who'd lost her way and found it again. "She made it," I whispered to him. "Our girl made it home." And in the garden, surrounded by roses and spring and second chances, Emma laughed. Looking back at everything I went through, 12 years of silence, watching my daughter suffer from the shadows, I want to share what I've learned. Don't be like me. Don't wait 12 years to fight for the people you love. When you see someone walking into danger, don't just warn them once and step back. Stay. Watch. Prepare. Because sometimes love means being patient, but it also means being ready to act. This is one of those family drama stories where a mother's intuition proved right, but at such a cost. Like so many grandma stories I've heard, it's about wisdom that comes with age, the ability to see through deception and protect the next generation, even when they push you away. My lesson: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. These family drama stories remind us that healing is possible, that reconciliation can happen, and that patience can lead to restoration. The Bible says in Proverbs, "A mother's wisdom is worth more than rubies." I clung to that truth during those 12 lonely years. Emma and I lost time we can never get back, but we gained understanding, forgiveness, and a stronger bond. These grandma stories teach us that no matter how far our children wander, home is always waiting, And those family drama stories you hear, they're warnings, lessons, and ultimately stories of hope. To anyone in a similar situation, don't give up. Keep loving, keep watching, keep hoping. And to the young people listening to these grandma stories, when someone older warns you, consider that they might see what you cannot. Experience isn't meant to control you, it's meant to protect you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please share your thoughts below. What would you have done in Emma's situation or mine? If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more meaningful narratives. A gentle reminder: while inspired by real events, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Feel free to explore other content if this doesn't suit your preferences.